What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, June 17th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 12 MLB games today, so full-size slate, about as big as they get. Going to go through game by game, as always. Get through pretty quickly because 12 gamers actually you can move a little bit faster since there's a lot of games that just kind of don't matter as much. But going to hit on everything relevant, ownership, matchups, all of that stuff. Going through game by game using the Run the Sims projections that you see on the screen. You can use these for your DFS play as well. Link is in the description below. 2 subscription options there. $100 a month gets you access to the full MLB DFS projections package, fully downloadable, fully detailed projections that come straight out of our in-house play-by-play sims. That's all the stuff that you see on the screen. Or if that doesn't make sense for you, we do also have the $10 MLB Draft Caddy package that just overlays the final DFS projection onto your DraftKings lineups page. So when you're hand building your lineups, swapping your lineups, whatever it may be, you have those projections right in front of you. Perfect for you if you're only playing a few lineups. Still get access to quality projections. You don't need access to all the fully detailed stuff that comes out of the sim. You just get the end product right on the screen. Both of those are available with the link in the description below. Use promo code UTAMLB and get 10% off as well. Also, link is now in the description for the Run the Sims Discord. That is free. You can just jump in there, talk MLB, talk whatever in the Discord. We hang out in there as well. Also, really like the Discord if you are subscribed and you have questions about the projections. We are generally good about being able to tell you exactly why something is showing up how it is, what our assumptions are on something. If you have a question about a projection and you can't find the answer just by looking at the detailed projections, generally, pretty good about being able to tell you exactly what is going into that because the people running the projections are active in the Discord. So that's a pretty cool feature as well that you don't get everywhere else. But that Discord is free. Link is in the description below. Going to try and grow that some more, get some more traffic and action in there. So check that out. Now, getting into it, starting with the Yankees taking on the Angels in Yankee Stadium. Will Warren pitching for the Yankees. Very good strikeout matchup for him. Kyle Hendricks pitching for the Angels. Very not good matchup for him. Will Warren is one of the highest projected pitchers on the slate, and he is only $7,500. As a result, he is projected for about 42% ownership, about a 24% chance of being optimal. Reminder, that does not mean he's a bad play. There are 24 pitchers on the slate. When you're talking about optimal rate, you're talking about hindsight analysis, essentially knowing what the highest scores were and then going back and saying, well, this was the highest scoring lineup. That obviously is not how you build lineups in DFS. It's not what you're trying to build in MLB DFS. In a sport like NBA Showdown or MMA, yeah, you need the actual optimal lineup. In MLB DFS, you don't. And if you're trying to build it, you're going to make some really, really bad lineups on the way. So a player being overowned does not mean a ton. A 24% optimal rate on a 12-game slate is still really high. Like if you think about that just in terms of there are 24 pitchers on the slate, your average, and you have 2 pitchers per lineup, on average, a pitcher is going to be optimal 8% of the time if you just, at random. So a 24% chance of being optimal obviously is very high. It's one of the highest marks on the slate. He should be one of the highest owned pitchers, but he is going a little bit over owned, 42% projected ownership there, but a very good value and one of the highest raw projections. If we back out of this game, you can see that we have the second highest, actually tied right now with Brian Wu, or just behind Brian Wu, for the second highest raw point projection on the slate, just ahead of a $10,300 Robbie Ray, ahead of Schwellenbach. Just a really, really good strikeout matchup here for Warren. You have a very right-handed heavy Angels lineup as well. We don't have the actual lineup yet, obviously, but there's nothing they can really do about it. You're probably going to have Nolan Schanuel and Luis Rengifo as your lefties. And then other than that, a right-handed heavy lineup. Now, there is power in this lineup. They are in Yankee Stadium, so there's always some risk anyway, but there is some risk in that regard as well. But also for Will Warren, so far this season, 32% strikeout percentage against right-handed hitters, 26% against lefties, nothing to sneeze at there either. 160 expected ISO to lefties, only 115 to righties, 342 expected WOBA to lefties, only 278 to righties, 14% swinging strike percentage against right-handed hitters. Sets up as a great spot for Will Warren, given all the right-handed strikeout-heavy batters that we have in this lineup for the Angels. On the other side, Hendricks not getting any ownership, $6,200 price tag, 6% chance of being optimal. So again, there's some chance he ends up being optimal, but it's not high, and he's not any sort of a priority, not anybody I would want to be getting to with any real frequency on this slate. Not a good strikeout pitcher, obviously not a good matchup against the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. Hendricks has a 14.5% strikeout percentage this year. He has the worst stuff plus grade on the entire slate. It's even worse than last year when it was already really bad. The only thing he does have going in his favor, very good command. Basically the reason Kyle Hendricks has been around as long as he has. Location plus score is 110.6 this season. That is actually the best, or tied for the best, on the entire slate, tied with Brian Wu. So that's what he has going for him. That's why he can sometimes be a frustrating pitcher to take hitters against. The stuff isn't good. He's like 100 years old now. I don't know. He might actually only be like 31 or 32. I couldn't even tell you. But it feels like he's been around forever, kind of just like smoke and mirroring his way through lineups. That really good command, a change up, the ability to change speeds. Like, he's a pitcher in, using the cliche, thrower versus pitcher. He's always been a pitcher, and there's not many of those guys left anymore. So he really stands out, as this guy that just doesn't throw hard at all. You can probably go to your closest high school and find somebody that throws harder than him, but knows how to pitch, knows how to locate. That doesn't translate very well to DFS production. For the bats here, around a 4 total for the Angels. Again, really tough matchup for them, just given the splits that you have for Will Warren and the lineup, the way the lineup is constructed for the Angels. You prefer left-handed bats against Warren. The Angels don't really have it outside of Shanuel and Rengifo. That's not to say that they can't do damage. Like, if Will Warren just doesn't have his best stuff, then yeah, you still have Zach Neto, Mike Trout, Taylor Ward, Joe Adell, Logan O'Hoppe, all these guys that have power in Yankee Stadium. But assuming Warren has some semblance of his normal ability to pitch tonight, nothing that's going to look great here. There is no ownership coming into the Angels, and you do have a 40% owned pitcher on the other side. So in large field tournaments, if you wanted to make the case for mixing in some Angels, that would be fine. Or that would be your case. Mike Trout, 5% chance of being optimal. Neto, 4%. And then it goes down from there. So very low probability stack. Technically going a little bit under-owned, but very tough spot. And the biggest argument for getting to them would be to just negatively correlate against 40+% of the field. The Yankees are going to get a bit more ownership, as you would expect. Aaron Judge leading the way at 15%, 8% chance of being optimal. He, again, when you get the most expensive hitters, especially when they're in the outfield, generally it's pretty common for them to look like they're going over-owned. But still a relatively high probability play for a hitter on a 12-game slate. Behind him, you have Jazz Chisholm coming in at 8% to be optimal, around 5% on Grisham, on Stanton, on Rice. They're all getting like 5 to 10% ownership, Bellinger as well. So the Yankees, outside of Judge, basically 5 to 10% owned, 4 to 8% chance of being optimal. So a little over-owned, but nothing too crazy there. High team total, very good hitting environment, obviously. Solid matchup overall against Hendricks. 222 expected ISO to righties this year, 151 to lefties. Stanton being back lengthens this lineup as well, and he is only 4K. One other thing to like about Stanton here is that Hendricks does not have a lot of swing and miss stuff. We know when Stanton hits the ball, he hits it hard, he hits it far, he does a lot of damage. He has issues making contact. Nobody has issues making contact against Kyle Hendricks. So that's a bump for a hitter like Giancarlo Stanton. But obviously Judge, Jazz, Trent, Grisham, Stanton, Rice, Bellinger, Wells, all these guys are fine. But like I said, you have seen more right-handed power from Hendricks, allowed by Hendricks so far this year. So that does kind of push you a little bit more, if you needed a nudge, towards Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton. Arizona taking on Toronto. In Toronto, two offenses that are very, very difficult to strike out. Brandon Pfaadt is pitching for the Diamondbacks. Chris Bassett on the mound for Toronto. Pfaadt coming in at $6,800. Bassett coming in at $8,200. Brandon Pfaadt has been garbage this year. Strikeout percentage is down 6.5 points from last year to just 17.5%. Stuff plus grade is down 6 points. Pitching plus grade is down 3 points. 10 points. Location plus grade is down 6 points. There's nothing Brandon Pfaadt is doing as well this year as he did last year, not commanding the ball as well. Stuff isn't playing as well, not getting strikeouts. So tough spot for him. Then you have this matchup against Toronto. Very tough strikeout matchup. Not the best offense overall, but they do have quality hitters in general in their lineup, even though the production hasn't been there for a lot of this season. But very difficult strikeout matchup. Their active roster ranks 20th in WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year, but they also rank 30th, dead last in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. So no real interest in getting the FOD, 4% ownership, 4% chance of being optimal. And then similarly on the other side, you have seen better production from Chris Bassitt this season than FOD, certainly 22.5% K percentage, but very tough strikeout matchup against the Diamondbacks. They've pretty much just been neck and neck with the Yankees and the Dodgers this season in WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They don't strike out a lot. 16th in strikeout percentage, second right now in WRC plus, only trailing the Dodgers. So 4% chance of being optimal, about a 6%, 6% chance of being optimal at about 4% ownership for Bassitt. Not much interest in either pitcher here. Both these teams have team total around 4.5. The Blue Jays have the better matchup against FOD, but also the Diamondbacks are the better offense. So you're getting not much ownership at all coming into Arizona collectively, but you do have about 6% coming into Corbin Carroll. You have about 4% coming into Ketel Marte. Those guys have the highest optimal rates as well. About 9% for Corbin Carroll at 6K, about 6% for Ketel Marte at 5,700. Those guys are obviously good bats to get to, even though Bassett's not a terrible pitcher. Lefties have a 170 expected ISO against them this year. That's not terrible, but you can do some damage there. Against righties, Carroll, 329 expected ISO this season. Ketel Marte, 327 expected ISO. Those guys both certainly look good. And then you get a drop off to, if you're looking to stack the Diamondbacks, sure, you can get to some Perdomo, some Josh Naylor, Gabby Moreno, Eugenio Suarez has been great this year, but Carroll and Marte stand out as the two top guys from that Arizona offense against Bassitt. Both have the platoon advantage as well. For the Toronto side, better matchup against FOD and some pretty favorable pricing as well. So you're getting about 6% ownership coming into Addison Barger. You're getting about 7% coming into Vlad, and then like 5% to Jimenez, sub 5% to everybody else. Everybody's optimal rate is 5% or lower other than Addison Barger. 3,600, third base and outfield eligible in the favorable matchup against FOD, at least favorable this season. Again, Brandon FOD was a highly regarded pitching prospect. He'd had some success in previous seasons, but this year, 271 expected ISO allowed to lefties, 277 to righties, expected WOBA above 400 to both sides of the plate. Addison Barger, again, multi-position eligibility, and he's cheap. 266 expected ISO against right-handed pitching this year. Like him quite a bit as a value play that still has upside. And then you go through the rest of this Blue Jays lineup. 191 expected ISO for Bichette. Only 169 this year for Vlad, but obviously a long track record of being a productive power hitter. 206 for Alejandro Kirk. 289 for Springer. Decent Toronto lineup to get to. Again, Barger, my favorite play here, but I like Kirk as a $3,800 catcher option, probably in the middle of the order. Springer only 4,300. Vlad's price tag at 4,600 offsets the lack of power we've seen this year as well. Only a 118 actual ISO against righties, so he has been unlucky in that regard, in addition to his expected power numbers just not being as good as you normally get. But at 4,600, you can kind of just play the track record with Vlad. You assume by the end of the year, the numbers are just going to be there. That's generally how baseball works. There's no real reason to think that he's falling off a cliff at this point in his career or anything like that. So from a value standpoint, the Blue Jays look pretty good. You get upside against a pitcher in FOD who has struggled. And then, you have a park that's decent for hitting home runs. But around this team, you're just going to be able to fill in really good pitching, really good one-offs, secondary stacks, whatever. Obviously, you don't have a ton of pitching to pay up for, or at least that you need to prioritize. You do have a few relatively expensive options that are good. But I mentioned earlier, Will Warren, 7,500, second highest projection on the slate. It means you're going to be able to allocate salary to some bats. And that is one reason probably that you don't see a little bit higher optimal percentage on these Blue Jays bats, because they are good value bats. But because Will Warren's price is broken, you can build very similar lineups with regard to pitching by going and get to teams that have higher totals. So I think that is kind of keeping Toronto's optimal percentages and ownership in check. But the nice thing is, they're not one of these offenses. They're not like a White Sox offense where the main selling point is point per dollar value. They are an offense that can just go score 10 runs, hit 5 home runs in a game. Like, they have power hitters. So I do think the Blue Jays look pretty interesting here as a secondary stack. Minnesota facing Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, good park for hitting. David Festa on the mound for the Twins. Andrew Abbott going for the Reds. Neither of these pitchers getting much ownership, and I don't really think that either one should. Festa's getting 5% ownership, only $7,200. Decent matchup, bad ballpark to pitch in, as I mentioned. 10% chance of being optimal. So I do think he's going a little bit under-owned. He's certainly somebody where if you are concerned about ownership in your lineup, you can pivot Will Warren to him potentially and get him at 1/8 the ownership. You can play him alongside Will Warren, have a low-owned SP2, and then get to whatever bats you want. There is some value here in Festa, but the optimal rate and ownership are relatively low because you do have Will Warren in the same price range, projecting 4 or 5 points better. But Festa, point per dollar wise, does look fine here. Nearly a 15 fantasy point projection. The only downside here really is the ballpark. The matchup against the Reds is fine. They're 14th in WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They're 9th in strikeout percentage. Obviously, they do have some quality hitters in their lineup. You're not talking about a lineup like the White Sox or the Rockies, but there is some strikeout upside. The park does hurt, though. So I think Festa as like a secondary mid-range option is fine. Can't call him a priority, obviously, since Will Warren is basically the same price. Limited sample so far this season for him. Relatively limited going back to last year as well. But about a 27% strikeout percentage against both sides of the plate going back to last season. Has allowed more power to righties so far in his young career than to lefties. 220 expected ISO to righties, 146 to lefties. He has a changeup that he throws nearly 40% of the time to left-handed hitters. He's generated about a 22% swinging strike percentage on it. He also throws his slider 20% of the time to lefties with about an 18% swinging strike percentage. So generally that tells you when it's a right-handed hitter, or a right-handed pitcher rather, getting swings and misses like that against opposite-handed hitters, he's probably doing a very good job of locating it, burying it back foot, usually making it look like a fastball until it just dives out of the strike zone, towards their back foot, hence back foot slider. So you can see that his secondary stuff plays very well against lefties. That is favorable, an advantage for him in this matchup, given that TJ Friedl, Gavin Lux, Dela Cruz, all from the left side, Benson from the left side. You are likely the best hitters on Cincinnati, Dela Cruz, obviously in particular, are mostly left-handed. So that is a little bit of a benefit for Festa that, he has shown the ability to get opposite-handed hitters out with quality secondary pitches. Andrew Abbott on the other side, 5% projected ownership, 8% chance of being optimal, projects for around 15 fantasy points as well. The issue here with Abbott is simply the $10,000 price tag. You can afford him in some lineups. You're going to have Warren, you're going to have maybe a different cheap pitcher. There's plenty of inexpensive stacks that still have upside, like the Blue Jays, for example. Like, you could probably stack Toronto, pair him with Warren, and then have money for Abbott if you want to. But there's also other pay up options. You have Robbie Ray on the slate. You have Schwellenbach on the slate. You have Wu on the slate. So secondary pay up option here for Abbott. You can go there to be different if you want to. But again, on a 12-game slate, you generally don't have to go too far off the board either. Strikeout percentage is up a bunch for him so far this year. 26.1% compared to 19.5% last year. So that's good to see. But, again, kind of just a secondary option here because of the price tag. For the bats, starting on the Minnesota side, great park to hit in here in Cincinnati for both of these teams, obviously. For Minnesota, about 7% projected ownership to Buxton at 5,800, to Jeffers at 3,600, probably hitting near the top of the order at catcher. Around 5% to Castro, to Correa, sub 5% to everybody else. Pretty much in line with the field there. 8% optimal rate to Byron Buxton leads the way amongst hitters, followed by about 6% to Ryan Jeffers, 5% apiece to Castro, to France, to Lee, to Correa, 4% to Bader. So another team, I think, kind of similar to the Blue Jays. Similar team total, similar pricing. Not the best matchup against Abbott, but a team that does have enough cheap power in a very good offensive park that your lineups, stacking them, are going to have very high ceilings because you're going to have whatever hitters, whatever pitching you want around them, and just be in a position where if Minnesota does have a good game, you're not looking at the rest of your lineup like, oh, well, now I need this shitty, $3,200 hitter to do well. You're looking at your lineup saying, oh, well, now as long as Aaron Judge has a good game, or, Ellie De La Cruz or whoever, I'm going to be in good shape. So it is a high upside offense here because of the park. The pricing looks really good from like a ceiling per dollar standpoint. So I do like that. Looking at Abbott's splits this season, right-handed hitters, only that's since last year. 26% strikeout percentage for righties, 27% for lefties, 174 expected ISO to righties. So he has given up a little bit of power there. And again, you do have plenty of right-handed power bats in this lineup. Since last season against left-handed pitching, Buxton, 251 expected ISO, only 148 for Jeffers, but he has a 208 actual ISO for whatever that's worth. And this is a park where, obviously power plays up. Willie Castro, only 135 expected, but 183 actual, 239 expected ISO for Correa. Ty France, 197 expected ISO. There is some power here. There are some guys that have probably been a little lucky in this split, but I do think Minnesota is very comparable to what I was saying about Toronto. Cincinnati on the other side, about 8% ownership coming into Encarnacion Strand, about 8% coming into Ellie De La Cruz. Those are the two highest projected players on the slate. As you can see, good point per dollar projection in particular on Encarnacion Strand at only $3,100. That's going to really stand out, probably in consideration in cash games as well, especially since he has first base and third base eligibility. I mentioned it with Festa too. He has given up so far in a brief major league career, has given up a bit more power to righties than lefties, with a 220 expected ISO since last season compared to 146 to lefties. So Encarnacion Strand, again, power bat, cheap, first base and the third base eligible, 247 expected ISO against right-handed pitching in 160 plate appearances since last season. Looks very good. Ellie De La Cruz, goes without saying, looks good if you can afford him. And then there's a little bit of a drop-off here. Nobody else getting more than 5% ownership. 4 to 5% chance of being optimal for Stevenson, for Friedel, for Lux, for Steer, for Benson. So another stack that I think just looks very similar to Minnesota, looks very similar to Toronto. They are affordable with the exception really of Ellie De La Cruz. Friedel's kind of expensive at $4,800 as well. But in general, a 5-man Cincinnati stack isn't going to break the bank. You're going to be able to get good pieces around it. They're in Great American, which is good. The matchup isn't ideal, but it's not like David Festa is some proven major league pitcher that you have to avoid bats against. He appears to be a solid arm so far, 27% K percentage, but will give up a little bit of power. So I think Cincinnati very, very comparable to Minnesota, very comparable to Toronto. These other pretty inexpensive teams in decent enough spots that we talked about so far. Mets are taking on Atlanta. In Atlanta, Spencer Schwellenbach going for the Braves. David Peterson is pitching for the Mets. $9K price tag on Peterson, getting about 2% ownership. $9,800 price tag on Schwellenbach, getting about 12% ownership. About a 13% chance of being optimal for Schwellenbach, about 7% for Peterson. So Peterson, low probability, technically going under-owned, but still not somebody that you're looking to really build around just because there are so many other pitchers on the slate, and he is $9,000. He's a solid arm. Overall, 21.5% strikeout percentage, but is good at getting quality outcomes, ranks about a third of a standard deviation better than average in my outcomes metric that prioritizes strikeouts, infield pop-ups, and groundouts. Pretty good command, 100.7 location plus grade, but just not somebody that I really want to pay $9K for against the Braves all that often. Schwellenbach on the other side, $9,800 price tag. Good pitcher, very tough matchup against the Mets. The Mets active roster this season against right-handed pitching ranks 25th in strikeout percentage. They rank 6th in WRC+. You just look through their lineup, and it's pretty obvious that it is a tough spot. One other negative here is that it's a pretty balanced lineup for the Mets overall, but the talent in the lineup is skewed left-handed, which is not good for Schwellenbach, especially in terms of strikeouts. Only a 20% K percentage against lefties since the start of last season, only 17.5% so far this season. You compare that to his strikeout percentage against righties, which is at 30.5% so far this season, 29.5% since last year. And it really stands out that he has struggled to strike out left-handed hitters. And the top of this Mets lineup, you're probably going to have Lindor from the left side, Soto from the left side, Nimmo probably in the middle of the lineup from the left side. The projected lineup that I'm looking at only has 4 lefties in it, but 3 of them are likely to be in the top 5. So those are the guys that Schwellenbach is facing, more often, obviously, than the bottom of the lineup, and they're good. Lindor, Soto, Nimmo, 3 of the best hitters on this team. Alonso, obviously, up there as well from the right side, but the talent in this lineup is mostly left-handed, which is not ideal for Schwellenbach, in addition to it just being a quality offense. That being said, it is a good pitcher, and he's not getting a ton of ownership at 12%. I think the 12% ownership coming into him is pretty much correct. 23.5% K percentage so far this year, which is down 2 points from last year. His stuff plus grade is up 3 points. His command has been better. Location plus grade is up 2 points. Pitching plus grade is the highest on the slate by a lot at 118.2, just elite number there. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see more strikeouts, as the year goes on. But at the same time, you are 89 innings pitched into the season. I do think, and this is just kind of anecdotally off the top of my head, he has had some, or a lot, it seems like, of lefty heavy matchups that are probably driving down that strikeout percentage a little bit. I feel like every time I do a show, I end up going down that left-handed strikeout splits rabbit hole with Schwellenbach because he ends up not facing a team that I'm really happy with the matchup. Like if you get him against the Angels, the dude probably strikes out like 15 guys. But he's I think off the top of my head, at least, he's faced a lot of like left-handed heavy lineups. So that could explain the little bit of a drop off in strikeout percentage as well. But overall, a solid pitcher in a tough spot, and you're not getting any salary discount. This is somebody where if you got like an $8,600 price tag on him because he's facing the Mets, then he's probably, 25% owned, but you're paying full freight for him in a difficult matchup. Devin said, complete game, 15 strikeouts against the Angels or the Astros. Yeah. Pay whatever he costs whenever he faced the Angels or the Astros. It's kind of Will Warren on steroids. Like from a split standpoint, I talked about the Will Warren splits in that game. The strikeout percentage against righties is similar, but Warren actually strikes lefties out too. Schwellenbach is just drastic in terms of the strikeout splits. So neither pitcher in this game is a true priority. Schwellenbach, I do think, looks a little bit better than Peterson, showing up as optimal around twice as often, getting like 6 times as much ownership. For the bats here, no ownership coming into the Mets, and that always makes them somewhat interesting in tournaments just because they're good. 7% chance of being optimal for Soto, only a $5,400 price tag there as he remains pretty inexpensive. 6% chance of being optimal for $4,200 Nimmo, 5% for a $5,200 Alonso, 4% for a $5,600 Lindor. They're low owned for a reason. The reason is that they are facing one of the more talented pitchers on the slate, on a slate where you have 24 offenses to choose from, but it's a really good offense. So I think they are going under owned, but still relatively low probability because of the matchup. The best way to target them may be to just, mix in a couple. Maybe not full stack, but just say, okay, I'll take an unowned Juan Soto here because it's Juan Soto at 5,400 and no ownership. I'll pair him with Lindor. I'll pair him with Nimmo and, use somebody else as a primary stack. You could also make the case that a full stack for the Mets makes sense from the standpoint of if Schwellenbach has his normal stuff, you don't really want any of them. But if he's not on top of his game, you have this very, very good offense that can take advantage top to bottom. So that would be kind of the case for 5-man stacking the Mets. But individually, I think Soto, Nimmo, Alonso, Lindor, as you would expect, the top options here. That's pretty much always the case. For the Braves on the other side, very similar. 4 to 7% ownership coming into Albies, to Riley, and to Acuna. Those look like the top plays from the Braves. About a 5 to 6% chance of being optimal for all 3 of those guys. So pretty much in line with the field there. Acuna is pretty expensive at 6,300 at a position in the outfield where you do have a very high opportunity cost. But it's also Ronald Acuna. He's great. Goes without saying. So far this season, only a 130 expected ISO allowed to righties for David Peterson, sub 100 to lefties. Go back to last year, very, very similar splits. 136 expected ISO to righties, 102 to lefties. He's good at keeping the ball on the ground. He's good at limiting power. He also has strikeout splits very similar to Schwellenbach, striking out 29.5% of the left-handed hitters he's faced since last year, compared to only 17.5% of the right-handed hitters. So again, it's not a spot where you really want to be getting to Peterson. You're probably going to have 7 right-handed hitters in this Braves lineup, but it's not a spot where outside of just saying, hey, the Braves have a lot of talent, I will mix them into some lineups. It's not a spot where you're looking at it and saying that you love targeting against Peterson because he is somebody that has very clearly shown the ability to get opposite-handed hitters out to limit power production. He just doesn't really do it via strikeout. Orioles are facing the Rays in the minor league stadium in Tampa. Zach Little on the mound for Tampa. Dean Kramer going for the Orioles. As of right now, I believe Kramer is starting. They went with a opener last time he pitched, but that was against the Tigers, where it makes sense to go with the opener. You move Carpenter down the lineup, you move Green down in the lineup. Maybe they could do it here just to kind of try and offset Josh Lowe, Brandon Lau, Aranda. I wouldn't be shocked, actually, now that I kind of think about it and look at the Rays lineup. I wouldn't be shocked if we get an announcement later in the day that Keegan Aiken is opening for the Orioles and then Dean Kramer is following. But it wouldn't change a lot. Like when the Orioles do that, generally Kramer will then come in and pitch like the rest of the game if he can. So whether he's getting the actual start or not, especially for DraftKings, like on FanDuel, it matters because you can't get a quality start if you don't start. On DraftKings, though, quality start isn't a thing. He's still in line for the win if he comes in the third inning and the Orioles end up winning. So it shouldn't really matter too much on DraftKings whether or not he starts or Aiken opens. $6,600 price tag, though, is pretty decent. It's a good strikeout matchup against the Rays. It is also a dangerous matchup. Like, this is a team that can hit. 9% chance of being optimal, 8% ownership. So basically just looks like a guy where if you need a $6,600 pitcher, he's going to be one of the better options, but you probably won't need it all that often on this slate anyway. From a splits standpoint so far this season, 17.5% K percentage against lefties, 20% against righties, giving up more power to lefties, 226 expected ISO. He did throw his splitter a ton in his last start, got a lot of swings and misses on it. I think it was like far and away the best of his career. So remains to be seen if that was a sign of things to come, or if it was just he had a really good pitch that one day. But that was a pitch he relied on very heavily, and it is a pitch that generally will play better, or play well at least, against opposite-handed hitters. So that will be something that I just want to pay attention to for him today and in general going forward. Was that an anomaly last start, or did he just figure something out, and now he's got a nasty splitter that's going to get a ton of swings and misses? That'll be something to pay attention to. But for now, I think, basically it's just the macro view of good strikeout matchup, dangerous park, but he's cheap. So if you need the cheap pitcher, fine, but I'm not like starting my lineup with Dean Kramer or anything. Zach Little, kind of the same thing, 7,300, 3% ownership. We actually have a little bit higher projection on him here than Kramer. He is also a little bit more expensive. So 3% ownership, about a 9% chance of being optimal. Low probability, but also probably going a little bit under-owned. Very dangerous matchup against the Orioles. This team is getting healthy. They're only missing a couple of their typical starters now. For a lot of the season, they've been missing like half of their lineup, but now they're missing Mountcastle, who hasn't hit for shit this year anyway, and they're missing Tyler O'Neill. But other than that, you got Westberg back, you got Mullins back, you got Kowser back. So this lineup is deeper than usual, or it's as deep as it's supposed to be, but it's deeper than it's been for a lot of this season. Very dangerous matchup. Only a 16.5% strikeout percentage so far this season. I'm a little surprised that the projection on him is as high as it is. Wouldn't be surprised to see that come down as the day goes on. Part of it, if we look here, you can see that we have Kobe Mayo in the projected lineup for the Orioles. That is probably increasing the projection at least a little bit because Kobe Mayo strikes out a lot. You also have Laureano in there, who he's a good hitter, but there are some strikeouts there. Carlson. So there are ways that the Orioles lineup ends up projecting for fewer strikeouts. Kobe Mayo, though, is the one that I really want to highlight here because he is going, as you can see over here, he is more than a strikeout by himself. So that does matter. And when you just look at the strikeout projections here, you can see that, Holiday, is going to be in the lineup, or you assume is going to be in the lineup. Same for Henderson. But the highest K guys here, Mayo may or may not be in the lineup. Laureano may or may not be in the lineup. Carlson may or may not be in the lineup. I actually have no idea why Colton Kowser is not in this projected lineup from our lineup provider. So, Kowser's probably in there over one of these guys at the very least. So you could certainly see that projection for Zach Little come down a bit. Once we get an Orioles lineup, this strikeout projection could drop off. One way or the other, it's a dangerous matchup. It's just a matter of how good does the strikeout matchup actually end up being. For the bats here, both these teams around a 5 total. You're getting about 7% ownership coming into a $4,900 Gunnar Henderson with the highest projection on the Orioles. You're getting about 5% ownership coming into Rutschman at 4K, coming into Jackson Holiday at 4,200. Less than that coming into everybody else, but about a 5% chance of being optimal for O'Hearn, for Mullins, for Urias, 3% for Laureano. Also, for whatever reason, Jordan Westberg is not in this projected lineup. So again, like if Mayo becomes Westberg and Carlson becomes Cowser or Laureano becomes Cowser, the little projection goes down. So not sure why our data provider has this projected lineup, but it's a weaker version of the Orioles lineup than we're going to get probably. So anyway, for the Orioles, I think they're another just kind of solid secondary stack. They're affordable, maybe a little bit more expensive collectively than like the Blue Jays, but there's nobody in this lineup above 5K. Gunner's the most expensive guy at 4,900. O'Hearn's at 48, and then it drops off. 4,200 for Holiday is nice. 4K for Adley is nice. Adley can get some of his, make up for some of his horrendous luck so far this year by just hitting pop-ups to right field that go over the wall in this stadium. I think he did it yesterday. I don't know where he hit it, but I'm pretty sure he had a lucky home run. So I do like the Orioles here. I do think there's a lot of upside. Another team that, from an optimal standpoint, pretty much 5 to 8% throughout their lineup. But them getting healthy just makes the stack better too, because you just have a better chance of them turning the lineup over, getting guys on base, getting you more at bats than when you have 4 good hitters at the top of the lineup and then 5 minor league hitters at the bottom. You have major league hitters throughout this lineup now. The weakest hitter that could possibly be in the Orioles lineup is one of the best hitting prospects in baseball in Kobe Mayo. So really, really, deep, good lineup now makes the stack pretty interesting, especially in this part where you can just hit lucky home runs. On the other side, I think Tampa Bay, comparable to the Orioles. Brandon Lowe, Josh Lowe, I think the two that really stand out here. I mentioned that Kramer has given up power to lefties so far this year. 226 expected ISO compared to 152 to righties. Lowe only 4,400, Lowe only 4,400. Like both of those guys, nothing wrong with Caminero or Aranda or Diaz either, but Brandon Lowe and Josh Lowe, I think, are the two that stand out the most in this matchup against Kramer. Cardinals are going into Chicago to take on the White Sox. Matthew Liberatore pitching for the Cardinals. Shane Smith is pitching for the White Sox. Shane Smith is somebody that we generally project a little bit higher than the industry. 14.5 fantasy point projection here, but he is $8,500. It is a tough matchup against the Cards. So not a priority, but I did want to just kind of single him out as somebody that we actually think is a pretty solid arm. And it is backed up. If you look at his stuff so far this year, 22.5% strikeout percentage in 68 innings pitched. Location plus grade is just about 100. Pitching plus grade right around 100. Stuff plus grade about 97. So I think he's got solid stuff. He's not getting any ownership here, about a 9% chance of being optimal. So I do think he's going under-owned, but still not a priority. The matchup is not ideal. The Cards active roster ranks 17th in WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They also rank 26th in strikeout percentage. So not somebody that I would expect to really be prioritizing here. 25% K percentage against righties, 19.5% against lefties. Liberatore on the other side, only 7,700 in a solid matchup with the White Sox, getting 5% ownership, 8% chance of being optimal. You can throw him in that bucket as, another either guy that you can play alongside Warren, or if you need it, an ownership pivot to him. Very similar, I think, to David Festa for Minnesota. You can see about a 13.5 point projection on Liberatore here. So far this season, he has struck out 20% of hitters, 98 stuff plus grade. Command has been much, much better than in the past. 102.7 location plus grade compared to 89.4 last year. That's a 13.3 point jump. That's a big, big improvement that he has made so far this season. It hasn't translated to increased strikeouts, though. Strikeout percentage is actually down 1.5 points. So good matchup. Solid, decent pitcher. Don't mind him, but clearly not prioritizing him over somebody like Will Warren. For the bats here, the Cardinals are getting a little bit of ownership. 7% coming into Nootbaar, coming into Donovan, coming into Herrera, coming into Contreras. I think all of that is reasonable. 5% to Win, 4% to Arenado. All of that's pretty much in line with optimal rates. They're just cheap. Lars Nootbaar, 3,700, has been slumping lately, I believe, but overall, a solid hitter. Brendan Donovan, only 3,700 at second base. Herrera is the only hitter in this lineup above 4K. So from a value standpoint, they are going to look pretty good. Wilson Contreras, first base only, so he doesn't overlap with Herrera. Just, another comparable to Minnesota and Cincinnati and Toronto, I think, for St. Louis. For the White Sox, they, again, I think pretty much correctly owned. You have some value here that really isn't bad. Miguel Vargas, still only 3K with the platoon advantage at third base. I think that's a good value play. He's somebody I play a pretty nice chunk of the time. He has some power. Only a 126 expected ISO against lefties since last year. But that's only 164 plate appearances. He's over 200 against right-handed pitching this season. So there is some upside there at only 3K. If Luis Robert's in the lineup, he's getting 5% ownership. 3,700. He has hit like shit this year, but he does still try and steal bases. So at 3,700, there's that. And then there is also, the fact that at some point he probably figures out how to hit again. 2,500 for Edgar Carroll, probably hitting in the middle of the order at catcher. Not an exciting play, but a value bat at catcher hitting cleanup deserves, some consideration. Chase Meadroff gives you some stolen base upside as well. So clearly not prioritizing the White Sox here, but they are a team you can look to for a little bit of value if you need it. 2-mans, 3-mans, probably the way that I would want to go there. Milwaukee taking on the Cubs. Forgot to mention it. The White Sox game does have some weather concerns, as does the Cubs game. These two look like the biggest issues on the slate. Still pretty up in the air, so definitely check it out later on. It's 2:45 in the afternoon. I'm not going to pretend I know what the hell the weather is going to look like in Chicago in 5 hours, but definitely keep an eye on that. Make sure that it doesn't get worse. Milwaukee taking on the Cubs in Wrigley. The wind is blowing out a little bit if this game is able to go. Ben Brown pitching for the Cubs, Chad Patrick for the Brewers. Two pitchers that are being very efficiently owned right now, according to ownership projections and our optimal rates. Ben Brown, 7,400, 14% projected ownership, 12% chance of being optimal. Patrick not getting any ownership at 8K, 2% chance of being optimal. Very, very tough matchup for Patrick against this Cubs team. They rank 18th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. They rank 9th in WRC+. The Brewers against right-handed pitching rank 25th in WRC+. They do only rank 17th in strikeout percentage. Ben Brown is kind of a weird one. I mentioned it on Twitter the other day. I don't think he's as talented as it seems like the industry does, but he's also better than it seems like DraftKings thinks he is based on how they always price him. And so it kind of on a lot of slates ends up with him being really popular, and there's not a lot you can do about it because it's like, okay, well, even if I don't think he's that good, he's better than 7,200 or 7,400 or whatever. Here, he would be a lot more popular, but Will Warren takes a lot of that ownership away because that matchup against the Angels is just such a good strikeout matchup versus the matchup here against the Brewers. So you're getting less ownership to Brown, but still getting 10 to 15%. And I think that's around where it should be as a mid-range option. He has struck out 25% of hitters this year. Like, that's a good number. Stuff plus grade just below average. Command just below average. But up from last year. Solid pitcher overall. And I wasn't saying that I don't think he's good. I don't think he's like a future ace or at least current ace or anything like that. But he's more talented than 7,400. Like, he has a higher strikeout percentage than plenty of guys that are more expensive than him. He has a higher strikeout percentage this year than Schwellenbach. He has a higher strikeout percentage than Bassett. He has a higher strikeout percentage than Brian Wu. Not that I don't think this is a great spot for Wu, but that's beside the point. There is strikeout upside there, even though it's not a great strikeout matchup. I think it's a pretty good point per dollar spot for him. For the offenses, you do have a pretty high, two pretty high team totals in this game. Wind is blowing out, as I mentioned, so favorable for bats. Not blowing out at a crazy rate or anything like that, but it is still favorable. Starting with Milwaukee rather. Looks like they're going a little bit over-owned. Nothing too crazy. But William Contreras getting 7% ownership, Chourio getting 6%, Yelich getting 5%, basically like 3 to 4% optimal rates for those guys. So probably a little bit more ownership than warranted in this matchup with Brown, but they do have upside. It is good hitting conditions. Brown so far this season against right-handed hitters has struck out 23.8%, only a 126 expected ISO. Lefties, he struck out at a 30% rate. Obviously, that is elite. But he's allowed a 400 expected WOBA and a 295 expected ISO. So, if you're playing the splits game, the matchup game from a power standpoint, Christian Yelich, probably your best bet from the left side. Frelick is left-handed, Turang's left-handed, but Yelich at 4,400 would be the one that I kind of single out for a home run off of Brown. On the other side for the Cubs, again, very, very high upside offense. And not only because of power, this is also an offense that will run, will steal bases. So they can give you tournament winning upside in a variety of ways, which is always really nice. 5% projected ownership to Happ, to Tucker, to Kelly, about 4% to Suzuki, PCA. Similar optimal rates across the board. Kyle Tucker leading the way at about 4% at 6,400. So the issue with the Cubs is that they are expensive. You have all these teams that we've already mentioned that you can put really good pitching, you can put really good hitting around them. It makes it that much more difficult to prioritize the Cubs, even though they are really, really good, because they truly have to outscore like all of those teams for you to not be at a disadvantage. Because let's say the Cubs score 10, but then one of these other teams, the Blue Jays, I don't know who I mentioned, the Blue Jays, the Orioles, the Twins, the Reds, I was blanking on that game. Any of these teams, if they score even a comparable amount to Chicago, the teams, the lineups that have Twins, Reds, Blue Jays, Orioles, etc., just have the leg up on the projection for the rest of their lineup because they have better pitching, they have better one-offs, they have better secondary plays. So that's the problem with prioritizing the Cubs. It's not that, Chad Patrick is a great pitcher or anything like that. He has been solid this year, 175 expected ISO to righties, 133 to lefties. The Cubs have immense upside. It's just that there are so many other teams that are less expensive. That's pulling down the optimal rates for them. Kansas City taking on the Rangers in Texas. Jack Leiter pitching for the Rangers. Seth Lugo pitching for Kansas City. Better strikeout park getting out of KC for Lugo. Not that pitching in Texas is a cakewalk. It's a good park for hitters, good park for home runs. $7,800 price tag on Lugo. 6% ownership, 7% chance of being optimal. $6,900 Leiter getting 7% ownership, 5% chance of being optimal. Leiter is interesting in general because a few starts ago, he changed his glove. He went to a bigger glove that does not have a hole for his index finger on the back. He was concerned that he was tipping pitches. And I think it's really interesting because Jack Leiter is one of these pitchers where if you look at his underlying metrics, he's averaging 97.5 miles an hour on his fastball this year. His stuff plus grade is 110.2. That is basically tied with Schwellenbach for the best of any pitcher pitching today. His command hasn't been good, only an 89.1 location plus grade. But this season, he has only struck out 19% of hitters. If you throw 97.5 miles an hour and you have elite stuff, you should not be striking out 17.5% of hitters unless they have a very good idea of what pitch you're throwing. So it is interesting to me that he made that change because if you were to just look at those numbers and then somebody tells you that he's been tipping pitches, you would kind of just go, oh, wow, yeah, no shit, that makes sense. So that's interesting. He did it a few starts ago. Since then, he struck out 6 against the Cardinals in a tough strikeout matchup in 5 2/3, struck out 6 against Tampa Bay, struggled against Minnesota, struck out 3 in 4 innings, gave up 4 runs. So 2 good starts, 1 not so good start. Obviously remains to be seen what the actual impact is here, but I do think there's a decent chance that Jack Leiter is a better pitcher going forward than he has been to date from a DFS standpoint, from a strikeout standpoint. And I don't just mean that in 5 years he'll be better because he develops. Like that obviously is true too. I mean within this season. But all of that being said, very tough strikeout matchup here against Kansas City. Their active roster ranks second to last in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. So you do have the cheap price tag on Leiter. You have excellent stuff for Leiter. You still have a tough matchup for getting strikeouts against KC. So neither pitcher looks like a priority there. Neither offense looks great either. 7% ownership coming into Bobby Witt, the only guy above 5% on Kansas City. He has about a 10% chance of being optimal. He's Bobby Witt. Stolen base upside, power upside, park upgrade as far as home runs go for Witt. That is good. Homecoming also, if you're into that sort of thing. His dad played for the Rangers. I don't know what that narrative, what the track record of that narrative is, but his dad did play for Texas. So Bobby Witt, obviously great. Salvador Perez, I think, going a little underowned. Same for Garcia, same for India. I think this Kansas City team, given that they are in a better park for hitting home runs, should be getting a little bit more ownership. But at the same time, like I said, I do think you see Jack Leiter have more success going forward than he has to date. So I think he's probably a little bit underprojected. And similarly, I think Kansas City's probably a little bit overprojected. But from just an upside standpoint, I do like getting them out of Kauffman Stadium just because easier to hit home runs in Texas than in KC. On the Texas side against Lugo, I seem to always get to the Rangers, but not really looking like a priority today, which is nice change of pace for me. Lugo's not a great strikeout pitcher. He's not a great DFS pitcher. He is generally just good at limiting runs. 174 expected ISO to righties this year, 257 to lefties. That does stand out that he's giving up better contact than we've seen in the past. And now he is going from Kauffman Stadium to Globe Life Park or whatever it is in Texas now. So, again, not that Kauffman Stadium is good for preventing runs. The outfield's huge, balls fall in, but it is good for preventing home runs. And now you have to face Langford, Seager, Berger, whatever's left of Marcus Semien and Adolis Garcia, Josh Young in this park. So that's kind of interesting, but still nothing really standing out as far as optimal rates go. 4% ownership to Seager is the highest mark on the slate, 3% chance of being optimal. Wyatt Langford has the highest optimal rate at about 4.5%. So still not super interested in the Rangers, but it is kind of just an interesting note that you do have this park downgrade for home runs for Seth Lugo, and you do have a pitcher whose expected power numbers this year are worse than they usually are against the Texas team that does have some power. Going into Seattle, where the Boston Red Sox are taking on the Seattle Mariners. Red Sox pulled one out last night, 2-0 win, no Rafi Devers. I guess they're just never going to lose again. But this offense is garbage. And you have Brian Wu on the mound for Seattle. He is right now projected for, I believe, the second most ownership on the slate behind Warren. He's getting more than Robbie Ray. $9,500 price tag. He just looks really good here. I talked about it yesterday, but you're just taking Rafael Devers out of this Red Sox lineup, and you're not replacing him with anything because they didn't trade for any major league hitters. So suddenly this Red Sox active roster has the second highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching and the third lowest WRC plus. The only teams that have been worse against right-handed pitching on their active roster right now than the Red Sox are the White Sox and the Rockies. The Pirates are edging out the Red Sox by 1 point in WRC plus. So this lineup just got a lot worse. Not having Devers in there makes a huge difference. Now you do have some young talent that probably will put it together sooner than later. Anthony homered yesterday. You have Campbell, you have Meyer. There is young talent here, but the only hitter in this lineup that right now you're really afraid of at all is Jarren Duran and maybe Roman Anthony if you just want to say that he's going to go straight to raking in the majors, which most guys don't. It's not a good lineup. And then on top of that, they're not in Fenway. They're in T-Mobile, best pitcher's park in baseball. Brian Wu looks very good. Again, $9,500 price tag for a guy that strikes out 22% of hitters is generally not what you love, especially at 40% ownership. But he's got very, very good command. He's got good stuff. 103 stuff plus grade this year. Location plus grade is even better than that. And you've just got this Red Sox team that strikes out a lot, that doesn't have good hitters. 24% K percentage against righties, 20% against lefties. The lineup will probably be pretty balanced. The projected lineup I'm looking at has 5 righties, 4 lefties, but the top of the lineup does skew left-handed. It's just a good spot overall for Brian Wu. He's a good pitcher overall. 22% chance of being optimal at 40% owned. Very similar to Will Warren, where he's overowned, but there's plenty of ways you can be different throughout the rest of your lineup on a 12-game slate where you don't have to be super concerned about that. Walker Buehler on the other side does benefit from the park, obviously. He is only $7,000, 7% ownership, 9% chance of being optimal. Decent strikeout matchup for him as well. The Mariners have gotten back to striking out at least a reasonable rate. They're up to 10th overall in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. They do also rank 8th in WRC plus, so not a safe matchup, but the park does help. Buehler striking out 21% of hitters this year. Stuff has been around average. Command has been around average. He's kind of just an average pitcher in a good park in a tough matchup. And on some slates, that would get you a lot of ownership. You can see the 14.5 fantasy point, or you could if I click the right thing. You can now see the 14.5 fantasy point projection on Buehler. But again, he just kind of ends up around 5 to 10% owned because it's a lot easier to click Will Warren in that range. And by easier, I don't even mean bad. Will Warren projects much better in that range. You have Ben Brown in that range. And then you also have, you have Festa, you have Buehler, you have Lugo in that range that'll get at least a little bit of ownership. You have Liberatore in that range that'll get a little bit of ownership that is, comparable to Buehler. So Buehler's fine, but he's not on that same level with Will Warren or even Ben Brown, I don't think. Offensively, not generally a park that you want to target very aggressively. I don't really have interest in the Red Sox here. the only real case that you could make is they're not going to get any ownership and the opposing pitcher is going to be 40%. But on a 12-game slate, the problem you run into with the negative correlation thing, I've talked about it a lot, is you just have such a big middle ground for it to not matter. Like, if this is a 5-game slate and Brian Wu and for a fact Brian Wu's going to have a game that does not help you in fantasy, there's a very good chance that the Red Sox have a tournament winning game because there's only 9 other teams. For a fact the opposing pitcher didn't do well. Red Sox probably give you a chance to win. On a 12-game slate, $9,500 Brian Wu, he can score 13, 14 fantasy points, and it's a bad DFS play, but that doesn't mean the Red Sox did anything close to winning you a tournament. So that's why on these larger slates, the negative correlation component becomes less important. Also, it's just easier on larger slates to make a very good low-owned lineup that projects really, really well. Whereas on smaller slates, if you make a lineup that projects really well, it's probably a really popular lineup. And so mixing in pieces that negatively correlate against the popular pitcher to jump, to be another way to differentiate is important. Whereas on a 12-game slate, like I've named 20 teams, not exaggerating, but I've named a bunch of teams that are 5% owned and look pretty good. And you can just grab whichever one you want and not really worry about it too much. On the Seattle side, better spot for them, but still not much ownership. 3% coming into Raleigh, 3% coming into Rodriguez. Those are the 2 highest owned guys from Seattle. Raleigh about a 5% chance of being optimal. Rodriguez, 3%. Everybody else lower. If you can get to $5,900 Raleigh, by all means, the dude is amazing. It is incredible what he is doing offensively as a full-time catcher. Buehler has only allowed a 138 expected ISO to lefties this year, 220 to righties as they've done the bulk of the damage against him. Raleigh will be hitting from the left side, but again, just elite power there, but still not a priority. And I don't think any of these bats really are, given that they're playing in Seattle. Cleveland taking on the Giants in San Francisco. Robbie Ray is pitching for the Giants against the Guardians. For the Guardians, we have Slade Cecconi. So park upgrade for Cecconi going into San Francisco. Decent, 12 to 13 fantasy point projection at 7,600. 4% chance of being optimal, 5% ownership. He's another one. Just throw him in there with Festa, throw him in there with Walker Buehler. These low probability but low owned guys that you can use to differentiate if you need to, but they're clearly a step or two behind the priorities in this range. Robbie Ray, 10,300. He's a step behind like Wu and Warren as far as priorities. He's probably like a half step ahead of Schwellenbach since the Guardians aren't as good as the Mets and the game's in San Francisco. But he is kind of similar to Schwellenbach, where you're paying a little more than you would like. There are better options that are cheaper, but he still looks good. Like, you've got very good strikeout stuff. Robbie Ray has the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate behind Will Warren at 28%. That's down 5 points from last year. His stuff plus grade is down 7 points, but he's still striking guys out very well. His location plus is below average, but it's up 8 points from last year. You have to keep in mind that you're referencing, for context, what guys have done in the past. Robbie Ray never knows where the hell he's throwing the ball. He has a better idea of it this year, which can only help. So he looks good here. 20% ownership, 18% chance of being optimal. Compare that to, this is where, again, it doesn't mean Brian Wu's a bad play. It doesn't mean Will Warren's a bad play just because they're going over-owned. But ownership is pretty much correct on Robbie Ray as opposed to being too high compared to an efficient standpoint on Will Warren, an optimal standpoint, rather, on Will Warren and Brian Wu. So Ray looks fine here. Obviously, very good strikeout stuff in San Francisco. Not going to be upset about that. For the Guardians going up against him, not a ton of interest here. You do have an 8% chance of being optimal for Jose Ramirez. Haven't really mentioned third baseman that looked great on this slate. So he at 5,500 and 2% ownership is certainly interesting. But, you are paying a premium. You do have a huge park downgrade for him, and you do have a tough matchup against Ray. Only a 133 expected ISO, sub 300 expected WOBA against right-handed batters this year. Lane Thomas, 5% chance of being optimal. Is a $2,900 outfielder. If you wanted to if you needed to punt the outfield and you want to go to Lane Thomas, fine. His pinch hit percentage is not very high. David Fry, keep in mind, almost definitely getting pinch hit for as soon as Robbie Ray leaves the game. So he's a decent point per dollar projection, probably batting cleanup, first base catcher, but the park sucks, and he's probably only facing Robbie Ray and then leaving the game, which is not exactly perfect. San Francisco on the other side, better matchup against Saccone, but still in this terrible park for hitting. Nothing looks particularly good here either. No ownership coming in. Jung-Hoo Lee with the highest optimal rate at 4%. Elliot Ramos, Rafael Devers at like 3% behind that. Nothing that really stands out offensively for the Giants. About a 4 team total. Saccone has actually limited sample, but has been getting strikeouts this year. He has also given up a lot of expected power. Go back to last year, 198 expected ISO to lefties, 231 to righties. Again, he will give up power, but this park just kills it. And there's a million good offenses on this slate. Now getting into a couple good hitters parks to close this one out. Houston is taking on the A's. Feels like we've talked about nothing but pitching for the last couple of games, and that ends here. JP Sears pitching for the A's. Jason Alexander going for the Astros. No ownership coming into either one. 2% optimal rate to both of them. Not interested in the pitching in this game. We have plenty of other pitching to get to. Absolutely love the matchup for Houston against JP Sears. On the one hand, starting with the negative, you have 15 to 20% ownership or 10 to 20% ownership on pretty much the entire Astros lineup. That's crazy on a 12-game slate just because there's 23 other offenses. That being said, the optimal rates for this team are not very far behind. 16% chance of being optimal to a $4,000 Jose Altuve at 19% owned, 15% chance of being optimal for $3,300 Yainer Diaz, Pena at 13%, Christian Walker and Paredes also at 13%, 8% to Jake Myers and Cam Smith. So maybe, these guys going a little bit under-owned, but not by a big margin at all. And it's just there are multiple factors here. For one, they're in Sacramento, which we know has been very, very good for offense. You don't have Coors Field on the slate. You don't have a ton of good hitters parks in general on the slate. We haven't really loved a lot of these. Like you have Cincinnati, you have good parks. Like you have Yankee Stadium, but in at least one case, the pitching matchup isn't ideal. Like Will Warren's good. Toronto's fine. Cincinnati's a very good park, but the pitching isn't bad. You have good parks, but you don't have Coors. We have Dodger Stadium coming. A Stadium is great. And then you have a pitcher in JP Sears that is very susceptible to right-handed power. 215 expected ISO allowed to righties with an 18% strikeout percentage this year, 216 expected ISO allowed to righties since last year. And you have an Astros team that does not have left-handed hitters. This entire lineup is probably going to be right-handed. Pena, Paredes, Altuve, Diaz, Walker, obviously all can do a lot of damage. You may have Caratini and Diaz in the lineup, which sucks because you can only play one of them on DraftKings, but you're just going to have right-handed power bats, or at least, power adjacent bats, maybe not the best home run hitters, but guys that have at least some power. And then you have a park where it plays up. And on top of that, they're cheap. Jeremy Pena is $4,600. That's the most expensive hitter on this team. $4,300 Paredes, $4K Altuve. Everybody else is less. So you're right back into what I was talking about with the Reds, with the Blue Jays, to a little bit lesser extent with the Orioles, where you just have high upside offense in a pretty good spot that is really cheap. And so you're just going to have really, really good players around them as well. They look good even at the high ownership. And the nice thing about a 12-game slate, even though, generally the idea of playing guys that are 10 to 20% owned on a 12-gamer sucks from a hitting standpoint, your secondary stacks can be low owned very easily without giving up a lot in the way of projection. There's plenty of low owned pitching you can go to that are still good. I've talked about plenty of pitchers in that 7 to 8K range where, okay, maybe you're willing to sacrifice a few points of projection and get off of Will Warren in some Astros lineups for ownership, and then just hope that, he doesn't even have to have a bad game. He just has to lose to Festa or lose to Liberatore or lose to Buehler, whatever. Like any of that stuff can happen without him even being bad. So there's just plenty of ways still that you can differentiate. Einsteinium said with them being so popular, would you explore different stack configurations for them to keep ownership in check, or is that not needed since it's a 12-game slate? That's another way you can handle it. I'm not saying it's like a requirement or anything like that, because I think you can probably just make plus EV 5-man Astro stacks that, that's where maybe like Juan Soto comes in handy, or you play Mike Trout and you play somebody other than Will Warren. Like you can go that route very easily. You can find plenty of ways to do stuff like that. But I talked about it on shows previously too. Like if you go, everybody knows you stack in baseball. People make the majority of people are going to be playing like 5-2s, 5x, some 5-3s, 4-4, 4-3. If you go like 3-3-2, like, yeah, you're losing out on some of the correlation from the Astros, but there's a relatively high percentage of the time that, you know, the Astros do well, but there's only 3 guys that you actually need their score. Because especially on a 12 gamer, like you can find fantasy points anywhere. There's so many ways. So like the Astros can do well. Let's say you have Altuve, Diaz, Pena. They all score 22 points. Walker scores 14. Paredes scores 12. So like Walker and Paredes did well, but Altuve, Diaz, Pena are the ones where you're like, okay, cool. I'm really glad I have them. Then somewhere else you have like a 3-man, I don't know, Orioles. And so let's say like Ryan O'Hearn beats Christian Walker by 10 and Urias beats Paredes by 5. Like you're different that way from the vast majority of Houston stacks, because the vast majority of teams that have Altuve, Diaz, Pena also have at least one other Astro, if not 2. So you can use stack types to differentiate. Again, it's not a requirement. Like you can play plenty of good 5-man Astro stacks on this slate, I think, but that is another way you can handle it, is just knowing that, like, especially when 24 offenses are going, the chances of 5 guys from one offense all being guys you have to have are very low. And so you can differentiate just by saying, like, okay, I'll take 3 of them. Hopefully they're the best 3. And then I'll just get the best 3 hitters from another offense. And now my team is just built different. And at that point, like the raw ownership matters less too, because combinatorically you're different. Because again, like Altuve, 19% owned, Diaz, 19%, Pena, 18%, Walker, 15%, Paredes, 12% individually. But once a lineup has Altuve, Diaz, Pena, then Walker's probably like, I don't know, 30%. And Paredes is probably like 30%. And similarly, once it has those 3 guys, if you go to another team, that 15% owned hitter is actually like 5% or something like that. So like there's no great way, at least publicly available, to model out combinatorial ownership like that. But it is a reason that these like 3-3-2 stacks are actually powerful. And like people mock them when they win, like, oh, this 3-2 stack won. There's a reason that they do well. There's a couple of reasons they do well. And that is one, is that you are able to separate from the field without actually making worse plays. You're playing really good players just in a different grouping than the vast majority of people are. Moving over to the other side here, great park for the A's as well, obviously going up against Alexander. I don't actually off the top of my head know anything about him other than I want to say he used to pitch for the Brewers. And my computer froze. There we go. He is 6,500. He is making his first major league appearance since May 15th. He had been in the minors, first start in the majors since 2022. He is stretched out. He has been working as a starter, it looks like, in the minors. Either way, not looking to get to him here at 6,500 against the A's. A's bats getting some ownership, not a ton though, much less than the Astros. So that is one way that you can take advantage of this park and sacrifice some ownership, is just play the other side, get to the A's. Brent Rooker, 7% chance of being optimal. Butler at 5%. Those are the 2 highest marks from the A's. 5 to 10% ownership on Rooker, on Butler, on Soderstrom. Everybody else sub 5%. So not a crazy idea to either. Somebody mentioned the game stack in chat a minute ago. To go that route, mix in the A's with the Astros, just try and take advantage of, hopefully this is a game where like the umpire has a small strike zone. And also, like if the Astros get out to a 5-run lead, 6-run lead, you start getting not the best relievers later in the game. You have pitchers just making sure they don't walk people. They're more likely to leave pitches over the plate to be hit. That is why you do see some slight positive correlation between opposing hitters in the same game. It's not massive, but there is some, just because of the matchups that you get later in the game and the pitches you get to hit. If a game is relatively secure, obviously there's also the extreme where it's like 14-0 and everybody starts getting pinch hit for it. But the kind of sweet spot is like you get that like 7-run lead or something, and then pitchers are just going to get demoted if they walk anybody. So you're getting your 3-1 fastball to hit and stuff like that on the team that doesn't have any runs. And then, you get 1 or 2 home runs that way. So there's some merit to going that route, or just playing the A's instead of the Astros and, they get the same park. They're just getting a fraction of the ownership. And then finally wrapping things up here in Dodger Stadium, another very good park for hitting. Randy Vasquez on the mound for San Diego. I don't know that anybody in the history of Major League Baseball has ever had a better matchup than Shohei Ohtani has tonight. Vasquez is 6,300, not looking to go there. Do not have a confirmed starter for the Dodgers, so it looks like they're going with an opener again. Dreyer is likely to open and then be followed by Matt Sauer. So you're not looking to roster either of those guys. You're not looking to roster Vasquez here. Looking at the bats, starting with the Padres side, the bullpen game is never super appealing, but the Padres offense is solid and it is a good park for hitting. They have like a 4.5 team total. They are affordable. So they're another kind of secondary stack here. Tatis is getting 11% ownership at 5,100. I think that's warranted. Same for Machado, getting 6% at 5,300. They both have about an 8% chance of being optimal. Then the ownership falls off 5% to a $3,200 Bogarts, 4% apiece to Cronenworth and Sheets, who are both cheap. The Padres, I think, are in that bucket with like Toronto. They're a little bit more expensive, obviously, since you would like to include Fernando Tatis and Manny Machado, who are both north of 5K. But the rest of this lineup is cheap. The lineup's not as good collectively because they don't have Jackson Merrill. He's on the injured list, but there is value. Sheets has some power. Bogarts, I don't know, had some power 5 years ago. Cronenworth, historically, is a decent hitter at 3,300. So I don't mind the Padres here, but I certainly don't think they're a priority. I think they're kind of just in that very similar bucket with Minnesota, Cincinnati, Toronto, teams like that. On the other side, the Dodgers have, I believe, the highest team total on the slate. 22% ownership coming into Shohei Ohtani, 17% chance of being optimal. I said it a second ago. I've said it on shows before. I don't think anybody told Randy Vasquez that opposite-handed hitters exist in professional baseball because he has no idea how to get them out. And now he gets to face one of the best in Shohei Ohtani. Absolutely love the spot. 318 expected ISO with an 11% strikeout percentage, 438 expected WOBA against left-handed hitters for Vasquez this year. Ohtani, 410 expected ISO against righties since last year, 436 so far this year. I hope Ohtani's playing today. Like, the only thing I'm concerned about is, do the Dodgers like give him a day off because he pitched yesterday or something? I assume they won't. And assuming he's in the lineup, he is in such a good spot. Devin said 4 sharp lineouts. Yeah, probably. Or he'll walk 3 times or something like that. But unbelievably good spot for Shohei Ohtani. And he is part of the reason that like that optimal rate on Aaron Judge was only 8%. And it's only 8% on Acuna. Is as good as those guys are. And I'm not saying that like Aaron Judge against Kyle Hendricks is bad by any stretch. It's fucking phenomenal. This is like the dream matchup for Shohei Ohtani. Vasquez is a competent pitcher against righties. He's not good, but 172 expected ISO, 17% strikeout percentage. Will Smith, Mookie Betts, Teoscar, Pajes, they all look fine. They're getting like 5 to 8% ownership, 5 to 8% chance of being optimal. Max Muncy and Freddie Freeman also get to take advantage of that lefty matchup. 3,900 on Muncy does stand out. He's only getting 7% ownership, 8% chance of being optimal. Again, third base isn't a super strong position. There haven't been a ton of third basemen that I've loved on this slate. So I do like Max Muncy. He has power. He has this matchup against Vasquez that is incredible. The Padres bullpen, I'm pulling up now just to see what they have from a lefty reliever standpoint. They have 2 lefties or 3 lefties. One of them threw 19 pitches yesterday, so he's probably available today. The other 2 didn't pitch yesterday. So that's kind of the only negative for the lefties here. Not that you're worried about like pinch hit risk for Shohei Ohtani or anything, or really anything for him. Like he hits lefties well too. But Muncy, Freeman, again, like they're good hitters regardless. You probably will get some lefty-lefty matchups later on in the game. But my God, this matchup against Vasquez is unbelievably good for left-handed power bats in Dodger Stadium. It looks great. And again, not to take anything away from Mookie, from Will Smith, from Teoscar. These are good too. But the lefties are really just driving it here. Shohei in particular, but really also like Max Muncy. So to recap everything, starting with the pitching at the top for pitching, Will Warren, Brian Wu, Robbie Ray, your top 3, Spencer Schwellenbach, Ben Brown after that, and then just a bunch of dudes that have like a 5 to 10% chance of being optimal. Looking at hitters, starting at catcher, At the top, in terms of optimal rate, Yonder Diaz, Will Smith, Adley Rutschman looking like your top three there. At first base, Christian Walker, Shohei Ohtani, Vinny Pasquantino, Ty France. I like second base. Oh, also like Vlad, just a cheap price tag there. At second base, Jose Altuve, Brendan Donovan, Jackson Holiday. Third base, Isaac Paredes. Basically, if you play for the Astros, you're the best player at your position today, I think. Isaac Paredes, Manny Machado, Max Muncy, Jose Ramirez, if you can afford him. Shortstop, Jeremy Pena, Bobby Witt, Mookie Betts, Ellie De La Cruz, Gunnar Henderson look very comparable to Betts if you need some value. So it looks like paying off at shortstop is a priority. But if you do need value, Carlos Correa, Xander Bogaerts, Correa would probably be the preferred option at 3,600. And then in the outfield, more Shohei Ohtani, Corbin Carroll, Fernando Tatis, Aaron Judge, Byron Buxton. So paying up for more outfield bats, looking like shortstop and outfield is where we're looking to pay up a lot. Jake Myers and Cam Smith, Houston guys, if you need some value. Then you get back to Juan Soto, Brent Rooker. From a stacking standpoint, all stack types right now, Houston, Dodgers, KC, Yankees, Minnesota. I mentioned when I talked about KC, I do think that they might be a little bit overprojected just because of what I think are improvements Jack Leiter made. But definitely like Houston, definitely like the Dodgers. It is a home run park upgrade for KC. Yankees look good against Hendricks. Minnesota looks fine. Baltimore looks pretty good. 5-man stacks, Houston, again, KC, which in my brain, at least, I think is a little bit lower. But Houston, Dodgers, St. Louis, Baltimore, looking like your top stacks there as well. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for checking out the show. I will grab a home run pick here. Shohei Ohtani is cheating, but Shohei Ohtani. Beyond that, oh, holy shit. I don't think I've ever seen a home run projection anywhere close to that. Like the 0.33 here from Judge is like as high as you usually see. That is an insane home run projection for Shohei Ohtani. So yeah, not going to go Ohtani, not going to go Judge. Those are cheating. I'll go Christian Walker here off of JP Sears. Looks really good in that park. I like that one quite a bit. So that wraps this one up. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, jump in the Discord at Run the Sims. Link for that is in the description below. Link for projections in the description below. Thank you for checking out the show. Good luck on your lineups tonight. See you back here tomorrow.